Immigration, nationality, belonging in comic books, in contemporary comics in France. And I look at also how specific comic authors represent post-nationalism, meaning a rejection of nationality as something that helps belonging. I kind of argue that it hinders belonging. So that's something about my research. And we'll look at the museums that I visited. I was in France this past summer for like around 5 weeks. And I was thinking of maybe telling you very briefly why I got interested in comic books. And I actually was talking to my sister the other day to get the historical dates straight. And we're like, when was the first time we encountered a comic book? Why did we like it? So this is the story. My sister has asthma. And then when we were kids, she was like around 8, I was 7. She had to spend a few days in the hospital. She was fine, but she had to spend a few days. And my parents said, okay, well, you know, we'll bring something so she spends time with these little games or whatever. And then my dad brought Asterix and Obelix, it's a comic book. And I was like, so she was already at the hospital, and he was like, okay, we're gonna bring this and this and this to her. And I was like, oh, what's that? So you know, I was like, I'm gonna leaf through it. And I started reading it, and I was like, oh, this is really fun. So we were in the car on the way to the hospital, I'm like reading. And then we get to the hospital, see my sister, and I'm like, I'm not done. So I'm just like reading, and she's like sitting there, and my parents are like, can you play with your sister and not do that? So I think she told me you very reluctantly gave me the comic book. In my defense, I was not the only one. The doctor who was making the rounds came to check in on her, and he was like, whoa, what you got there? So he borrowed it too. So anyways, she read it in the end, but literally everybody wanted to read it. So anyways, the rest is history. My dad kind of caught on that we really liked it. He would buy it for us, but I think he would buy it for himself too. So just to point to like intergenerational appeal of comics, and specifically Asterix and Obelix, which I'm gonna show to you guys for a little show and tell later on. So yes, so that's just like the genesis of my interest. So the comic books are a big deal in France. Maybe you saw from my little description, 1 in 4 books is sold in the form of a comic book in France. Like, and every 4th book that's published is in the form of a comic book. And comics really are everywhere in general life too. So not just in a bookstore. So I was just walking in Paris and saw this little shop which was selling kind of memorabilia, like old stamps. And so many of these stamps, let's take out Harry Potter and Mickey Mouse, but all of the other stamps are characters from French and Francophone. Most of them are French. The only Francophone in Belgium is Indian. So I think this is important as stamps, kind of to my interest on nationality. Stamps are something I think that, like, as a nation, we want to be recognized by, right? So you get a letter from somewhere, and sometimes I feel like in the States, I mean, there are different stamps, but some of the popular stamps are national parks or something like that, right? So something that you want to receive and you're like, oh, this represents United States and this represents France. And it's not just Asterix was here, but it's like Lucky Luke and all these other guys. So very, very different comics that they all want to be associated with. In 2019, to celebrate 60 years of the birth of Asterix, France put into circulation their own 2 euro coins. So you could see, like, this is République Française. You know, this is coming from France. So again, like, money is something that, you know, is minted by the country, represents the country. They want you to see the comic book and be like, oh yeah, that's France. Of course, you know, this was a normal 2 euro coin. Of course, now it's a collectible, so it's really expensive. But I thought that was really fun and spoke to the importance of this product in the culture. Typical bookstore. This is not a specialized bookstore. Has huge shelves just for comics. Usually takes up the whole floor. So this is very, very common. And comics are about literally anything. They can be adventures, which were these traditional guys, self-help books. It can be biographies. It can be climate change. So really anything in the world. So I really like this. So I was just walking by and saw this construction sign. A part of the street was closed off, and I was like, okay, so their explanation of what's going on is kind of in the form of a comic, right? So this cute little drawing about we're attaching the heat to this house, and I thought this was a fun little way to have people stop by and see what's up rather than just having it written down. At least it worked for me. So that's just like in everyday life. And then really, really cool, I thought, was just in a random bookstore. I saw this poster, which is the play on a page of a well-known episode in Asterix and Obelix series. So for those who don't know, Asterix and Obelix are these two little guys who represent, their little village represents kind of France. And everybody's kind of read most of these in France. And so everybody would recognize, I recognized immediately what episode this is from. So what they did is they named it Asterix and Hierarchiques, because all the characters end in X. So Asterix and hierarchy. And they used the page that existed and just replaced with different words. Because here it says in the bottom, it says emancipation of workers will be the work of the workers themselves. So it's a political and social poster. But they replaced the text. For example, right here, this Roman general says, in the army, it's like at the factory, two things are important, authority and hierarchy. And Asterix says, oh, it seems like hierarchy, it's like shelves. The higher they are, the more useless they are. So I just thought it was like, oh, this is such a fun way to get people's attention and to spread your message, even if it's just informational, like in the form of a construction sign, or if it's political and social. I think they know this and people will recognize it, and it's humorous, and I think it works really well. Very briefly, the last thing before we get to the museums finally. This is the old room in the Richelieu Library. This is a public library in Paris, and it's meant for graphic arts, but most of it is for comic books. So this is where researchers are. They would sit down and hear, wow, the quality is kind of worse than I think I realized. But here are all these shelves filled with comic books. And what would happen a lot is people come and sit here, and people bring their kids, and kids just pick up a book and read. You can't check it out, but you can sit down and read. And something that was interesting was they did guided tours of comic book collections. And because it's comic books, and a lot of kids like comic books, and I think that's kind of the point also of the genre, families would come and bring their kids. So we had I was there, a few people, and a few families. And this tour started, and 2 minutes in, it was very clear this is not a tour for kids. It was very jargony, it was very historical, it was very this is one style, this is the other style. This is what the first caricature was, blah, blah. So the kids fell off the tour really quickly because they were bored. And I mentioned that because this is gonna be relevant for our talk about museums and comics. Okay, so let's finally get to the museums that listed. So we're gonna have two case studies, and the first one is Angoulême. Angoulême is the most famous, I would say, place for comic books. It's an unofficial capital, world capital of comics. So what happened in the 1970s, Angoulême had a publishing industry that was in a rut, that was struggling, and they decided to revive it. How do we revive it? Let's start an international comic book festival. And it really hit off super well. So now this is the International Festival of Comics in Angoulême. It's the most famous festival in the world. So they host the festival in January. They have this huge research center for comics artists and museum that we'll talk about in a sec. but they've also really embraced their identity around comics. And it's because, and you know it really, really easily, because the moment you get in, everything is about comics. So these are like common murals on the houses, on the buildings. So Goscinny is the guy who wrote the books for Asterix, for Lucky Luke, for Petit Nicolas, if you know the Nicholas and He's No Good. And kind of everywhere you go, there are displays with like they play with, you know, getting out of the frame, the 3D, and all these things. So you know very easily where you are, and it's a really cool, immersive experience, I would say. The streets are named after, not all of them, but most of them are named after authors and illustrators. And not only murals, but there are also monuments to objects that appear famously in comic books. So for example, in Asterix and Obelix, Obelix carries around, like right here, this huge menhir, which is this huge stone for his like building company. So there's a monument to the stone. And the moment you get off the train station, this is the first thing you see. Okay. Also, in the train station, this guy's hanging out on the top of the roof. This is a bust of Hergé, the creator of Tintin. So, so the authors, writers, and comics characters, it's all about them. Everywhere you go, it's all about them. Okay, cool. So now we're getting into the museum. The first thing you see once you're in the museum, and just to say my expectations were very high, because this is the most famous museum, is this little living room, reading room. Just comics, people pick up a comic and read there. And this was the most popular place for kids, which seems, you know, fine. And it was kind of, you know, surprising that the kids were like extremely happy just to sit down and read the comic book. And we'll come back to that. So you go through here and you come to the permanent collection. So the permanent exhibit and the tour I was on was again very informative for researchers or for people who are super into different drawing styles of comics. So you come in, there's like text, 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 text. Oh, what is a clear line? What is chiaroscuro? And then you would get examples of this, right? So you would have these literally taken out of a comic book, like one page framed. So these are the examples you can look at. There were some 3D objects like this rocket ship from Tintin, or like blown up images, but usually you would get framed pages of comics. And this is a comic that represented the big nose style. I have to say, I really like this sculpture because this is Marianne, and Marianne in France is the, you know, from the painting Liberty Guiding the People in French Revolution. So they created it in the style of Big Nose from the comic, which I think speaks something to, you know, their propensity to be reverent a little bit too, but also the connection between, I think, nationality and French identity. But these were exceptions. Usually there was so much text in a terrible, terrible font, in my opinion. So there was, you know, all these explanations, and then you would get an example, which was fine at the start, but then you would get really tired really early on. From what I experienced, there were no like audio things or something different. This is video. This was a temporary exhibit. This one was on science fiction. This one was Claire Bretécher, who's a woman comics author. I was a little more lenient, so to say, towards this exhibit because just the fonts were different. They played a little bit with the size of different things and the way they were exhibited. And she was also, Bretécher was also an adult. I mean, she was a comic artist for adults. So I kind of, I guess, took that a little bit, yes, with some leniency, I guess. But what they did was like they exhibited her different process of work, the magazines she would draw for. This is like misogynist France, so she was very critical, and also the cultural products that came out of comics. So people would buy these little shoes that one of her heroines, Agrippina, would wear. So that's just, again, to point to the influence comics had in everyday life. Yes, and then we finally get to a place where this is for the kids. So they connected two exhibits, one that was kind of more adult themed and that one for kids, because it was from the same author. This one is like these old guys who are socialists and pro-union, and they're doing all these different things. And this one is about wolf in underpants. And the lady who illustrated Wolf in Underpants, I think the story is just cute, so I'll share it. She created this character because her child was really scared of wolves. She was like, "Oh, look at this! I'm gonna draw this little cute little wolf in underpants, so you're not gonna be scared." And he's gonna have his own fears. So here he says, "Bien sûr que si les loups ont des chocottes, ils en ont des tas." Of course, wolves also have fears. They have so many, and the kids would like sit down here and like write their own fear and put it up on these little things. So anyways, great. But you can see all these framed images, even here, framed. So like, yeah, the 3D situation is nice because it's a little bit immersive. Here they ask the kids to do something, so they engage with it. But I was very critical about just going to the wall, next to the wall to read, next to the wall to read. I was like, well, might as well just sit down then. Maybe even more comfortable position. That was my take. The second museum that I visited was in Blois. Blois is a city or a town actually in kind of central France. It's on the Loire Valley, and it's the region in France which has this beautiful castles all around. This one is one of them, and it's similar and also very different from Angoulême. Angoulême is all about comics. Blois is not. They do have their own festival happening in November, Maison de la BD, House of Comics. So that's a comics museum is there, but also I think this is important. Everything is free in Blois. So to come to the events is free, to come to the festival is free. In Angoulême, pay. And the International Comic Festival in Angoulême, because it lasts a few days, it can get a little expensive. So they both get subsidies from the government. Blois has to get less because it's less famous, it's smaller, and so on. Oh my God, the temporary exhibit, insane. It was like reading an encyclopedia on copy pasted on the walls. So many names, so many, historical facts that are useful, but get like really tiring, really early on. Again, so many comic pages on the wall. I mean, this is a little cute story where this guy's waiting for his friend who's taking forever to come, but he's taking forever because he's a minotaur. He has to get out of the labyrinth, and it's hard. I want to acknowledge the positives of exhibiting comics in this way. I understand a visitor can come, see it on the wall, and say, "Oh my God, I love this drawing style, or this is really cute, or like this story. I'm gonna look up the author and get something else later." But again, I think that serves only comics which start the exhibit, because after a while, you're getting a little lightheaded, I think. Yes. Reading spaces abundant. This was kind of an adult reading space. Interestingly, Blois, which is a smaller museum, had more reading spaces, like a couple for adults and one that I didn't take a picture of. I felt kind of weird because so many kids were there. A lot of kids were there, beanbags, drawing, reading, and that was the most popular part of the museum, rather than the museum itself. Okay, so I think this was a temporary exhibit in Blois, and I thought this was very well done. And this is an exhibit on comics and board games. So you enter in, there's table set up, you can just sit down and play a board game. And board games were about comic books, and they also had these kind of historical board games exhibited. Take a look. So like Cards for Asterix, this little 3D house situation with Titeuf, which is another popular character. Of course, can't escape Tintin around the world. And they connected them in a sense that was fun. They had a few explanations on the walls, and they connected them not just because, oh, copy paste, right? Board game, which represents a comic book, but they connected the two genres, so to say. So for example, in board games, both board games and comics, the graphic style and the beauty of your graphic style is really important to attract your audience. There's a sense of adventure, both, they're different, obviously very different comics, but like in the traditional adventure style comics, adventure is, again, very important. So in this sense, you follow your protagonist in the comic book. Here you can kind of inhabit their role and go around being Tintin around the world. And there's also like a narrative style that's important in both. So I liked it because it was immersive, so people would play with it immediately. And also it connected us to something, to a different genre that was similar to comic books, or that could allow us to experience the narration or the characters of a comic books in a different way. What was great about this, I think, was that it was a successful immersive experience that didn't seem cost prohibitive, right? Just like, oh, there's some board games, sit down and play. And usually when we talk about immersive experiences, like technology, 3D, something, I don't know, virtual reality, right? Which can be, I think, which can be expensive, but also sometimes kind of glitchy and sometimes not actually that great. So I really like this, and this was really popular with my books. So what do we have in these two museums that's in common? Reading spaces, great, very popular, definitely should keep that. So many wordy explanations of comics that I think get a little tiring. And something that that I was thinking about, and I'm happy to talk to you guys about, is how we consider, are these spaces good for comics? I do think that comics should have their museums, and it's good that they do. But the way to exhibit comics needs to be, in my opinion, a little bit different. So when we think about paintings in art institutes, they were meant to be like looked at on the wall, right? Maybe they were in somebody's house, but now they're in the museum. And comic books were meant to be read like this, right? So framing them all around the wall, is that giving us something new? Is that helpful, or is that not helpful? So this is a portrait of me explaining to museums how to do that. And so in my opinion, I think that, the immersive environments they were trying to create also, which is like 3D cutouts in the little wolf exhibit or something else, that was great. We don't need to have that everywhere to like resemble a Disney World. But I think it needs to add something to the genre. It's either our understanding of the genre, either how to experience it differently, which again, I think the board games did pretty well. Permanent exhibits, I think, need to be rethought, especially with wordy examples. And I think this is kind of the crux of my thinking about museums and comic books and what museums should be. I felt, in my frustration with the wordy examples and the framed comics on the walls, I kind of felt that because comics are considered and have been considered more seriously as art in France for a longer time than here, it felt like they were trying to, in a sense, legitimize themselves. So like, what are other museums doing? Other museums have these explanations. Other museums have frames, blah, blah, so we will do that. And I don't think that's helpful to the genre. I think it's kind of makes it less immersive and less interesting. And then everybody just kind of hangs out at the living room, reading room, and reads. Whenever I talk about museums, talk about, they should have readings and workshops and community-based discussions. I think most museums should be based on American public libraries, which I love, like Ann Arbor Public Library, amazing. Just like with all these different things that are happening, I think that should be what's going on in museums a lot. And they do these things, especially during the festival, but I think they should just be more regular. Also, I said here, keep it playful and the list of the appeal of comics. I think museums, like, or any institutions that are dedicated to a specific cultural object, should try to maintain the spirit of the object, right? And the comics are something like, again, there are different comics. There's like Mouse, which is very serious, and Persepolis, and so on. And then there's Asterix and Obelix, which is not very serious. But the initial reaction to comic books is like, oh, this is something fun that I'm going to do in my free time. something not that serious, maybe, or I mean, in many ways you could analyze comics seriously because that's what you research. But I think that's something that museums need to take into account. How do you keep the spirit of this product or this genre alive? This is a quote I really like, and I think about when I'm writing my dissertation, when I was visiting museums. So it's by this art historian, David Kanzler, who says, scholars and academics take nothing so seriously as the comic. They should fear nothing more than grinding it into scholarly dust. That's kind of, when people ask me, what are you doing your dissertation on? I say, it's contemporary French comics. And they're like, oh, that's so cool. I'm like, yes. And I hope that I do it justice. The worst thing would be to like write a boring dissertation about comic books. So I think this was important for the museums. Also, I liked this kind of before closing down this like gates and barriers, which kind of remind me a little bit of academic gatekeeping. And when you can see here again, like you enter and then frames. So you just like go around reading comics on the walls. Also, and I will speak about this in a second. These spaces are not that friendly for kids. So of course, some subjects maybe are more prone to get children's attention and some less. But here, even if the kid wanted to read it, they literally can't. I feel like they would have to like really tilt their head real high and probably can't reach it. Is there a cure? I think there is. This is from different museum. This is from the Immigration Museum in France. And I really like their idea of what they were doing. So they had these little pamphlets for kids. And for the kids, they would be like, oh, wherever you go in the exhibit, you're going to find this little yellow suitcase. And yellow suitcase means this is this is for you. The text is meant for you. And what they would do is, as the immigration museum space was covering such different things, and some were probably heavier for kids and some were not, the families could move together the whole time because the kids would have like this little suitcase like around here, somewhere below where they can see it and they can read it in a way that's meant to be written for them. So because it was immigration, they were kind of like, what is immigration? And immigration also means that people, when they immigrate, they bring things with them, like toys, because they were mentioning yo-yos, right? And they were like, what would you bring? And stuff like that, which I think was great because they figured out a way to make things relevant for the kids, and also the whole family could stay together. In comic books museum, I don't know how the whole family could stay together throughout the whole exhibit, because some parts were definitely not for everyone. So I thought this was a good middle ground of making something that seems less accessible to kids more approachable at the same time. Also physically, because of where it was positioned. To be fair to Angoulême, they said on their official website that they are undertaking a deep reflection to make their experience more immersive. I don't know what that means. Is it going to be more technology? Is it going to be well done? What does it mean? But to be fair to them, they are rethinking this. And apparently in June 2026, they're going to implement some changes, and then I'll be happy to get more funding. I'll go back and I'll report back. But anyway, so that they are thinking about that, which is great. So I'm excited to see what they do. And that's all. Thank you so much. If people have never seen Asterix and Obelix, I brought this little one so you can just flip through it, see what's up. Yeah, and I'm happy to like talk to you guys or answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Gala.
Thank you.
But we do have some time for questions on Gala's presentation and maybe other questions related to her research.
I have a question. First of all, I mean, it's great that you are addressing something which is not seriously taken here in the US. But you did complain or
Yes.
about the text aspect and the museum and so on and so forth. But you have to remember that the BD, Bande Dessinée, they were trying to bring people interested to stories.
Mhm.
And Asterix and Obelix, it's a very serious book, by the way.
I mean,
It has
it
to
is.
do with the history of France
I know,
against the Roman. But in any case, so people who don't read much, BD gave them drawings and so on and so forth. So people got involved. That's how France is now, like you mentioned specifically, that is a major art
Yeah.
thing. So don't you think that the text in the museums,
Mhm.
they're trying to bring back
Mhm.
that this is our serious stuff?
Mhm.
Just like would be any novel book or anything like that.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's the
Yeah.
approach?
Yeah, sure, yes. Thank you for the question. I 100% think that Asterix and Obelix is a serious book. I just meant it's something that you can come back to. A lot of times I'm reading it differently than I read it when I was 7, right? But when I was 7, I really liked it too, and it was fun, right? And I still think even now that I read it in a more critical eye and I'm thinking about all these things about identity, it's still a really fun read to me, which doesn't mean it's not serious. It's kind of like a balancing act, right? Between what do we do to make ourselves like legitimate, right? And I agree with you that obviously some information is necessary and they should include it. I just thought that the way that the text was exhibited was too wordy in the sense that it was fatiguing to read it. So, you're reading this and you're like, okay, cool, this is great, but then you get really tired to dedicate the attention that the exhibit deserves later on, right? So, and I think, I mean, this is a bigger cultural issue, maybe. Like, do we, why do we have to, provide, or do we have to provide so much text and in this specific way to be taken seriously, right? Is this the only way to be taken seriously, or are there ways that are considered less traditionally serious, but they're still very legitimate? So
So you're saying there is an improvement that can be done.
yeah, that's what I think. That's what
Offer
I mean. I think it's
knowledge.
awesome that the comic museum exists, and that
I agree.
fact in itself, I think, is just having a museum is like a legitimizing kind of factor. And I think they're trying to figure out how to do it best. They're, I'm always critical of too much text on the wall and in any museums. I think they were like kind of being maybe a little bit conservative in their approach, which is, maybe fair, especially at the start, right? But yes, thank you. That was a good question.
Thank you.
Yes, Barbara.
Did you have any chance to interact with the curators of the museum or staff who works there to kind of
Mhm.
exchange your views of
Yeah.
or understand their
Yeah, so in Blois, not really. I think that was Blois seemed much less staff filled. How can I say? It seemed like a less funded kind of place, and it was just like a person who was there to say welcome. That's it. In Angoulême, I talked a little bit at the tour, but I think the tour person was just like this kind of student or something that was giving the tour, and I felt a little maybe maybe I should have been maybe more direct about it, but it felt like they were just like, I'm just here to do my tour. So I didn't get a chance to talk to people who curated it, but that's a great question. It's a good point to ask people, what was your thinking when you created it this way? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Hopefully next time. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for such a fascinating talk. I was thinking of I'm really interested in your observation about is putting a comics page in a frame, like, is that the right way to show a comic? And I'm thinking about, in terms of there's cartoons, which are just one panel, but then comics are more of a narrative, but
Yeah.
then when I have taught comics, you can look at a page on its own.
Sure.
Could you talk a little bit more? Did you see other approaches where they're whereas, you saw maybe a whole narrative, or, what would be what do you imagine would be a really wonderful way to engage with comics in a kind of installation space?
Great question. So it was like easy for me to criticize, right? Without giving suggestions for improvement. I mean, there were definitely pages that were exhibited that could stand alone, right? And that would give you like a sense of what the story is. And most of those were, in permanent exhibits specifically, most of those were the traditional first comics that became famous, like Tintin, Asterix, and so on. How to do it? So that's I don't know. So that's a really interesting and hard kind of question. I was phrasing a lot the board game installation because it connects it to a different way. Of course, the museums do have often they have some kind of sometimes actually I don't think Angoulême did right now, but they usually have some kind of an animated showing because a lot of times the comics are translated into movies or animated cartoons or so on. But yeah, I mean, I need to like think a bit more about what do I think the best way um to exhibit them. I just feel like I'm just kind of honestly I think blowing up on the wall or having a bigger resolution, bigger font, bigger, something that needs to be like different. I don't think the whole museum can be framed comic books, right? I think some of them might, right, to make a point about something, but if the whole museum is like that, that's working.
Well, and like the
Yeah.
form itself offers this kind of beautiful,
Mhm.
always the balance of the text and the image, like
Yeah.
always sort of in tension, but also supporting each other. It's really interesting to think about how that could be translated into a museum space.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Great ones. Thinking about it, thanks.
I mean, you could even have it where like museum text is in a comic format or something. Sorry, I'm just like,
Yeah, go
my
ahead.
mind is firing. What I think is really interesting about
Speech bubbles, yeah.
your presentation also, especially of Angoulême, sorry, I can't pronounce these
No,
words,
that's
but-
right.
Oh, thank you. Is partly that it almost feels like it says much more about the museum as a genre than it does about comic books as a genre, because it's like a museum is something on a wall with text next to it.
Yeah.
And you maybe move in like a linear way.
Yeah.
Whereas when I imagine a comic book page, your eye can go in all these different places and get all these different kind of narrative elements, which is something that maybe also rang true with the board games. People move in different paces around a board
Yeah.
game.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's very interesting from like a museum studies angle, which is like, what is this telling us about the museum as a genre?
Yeah.
So thank you for that. My question is unrelated. I just got excited by that discussion.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you saw anything in either of these museums that is helpful for your dissertation research, if there were any like representations of migrants in comics or comics that are kind of challenging national narratives that was being exhibited.
Yeah. So really interestingly, and I didn't talk about this, but in none of these, neither of the two museums, there was kind of a discussion of the bad history of comics, right? Which I saw in the museum, the Immigration Museum. So Immigration Museum, there was like, what were the first caricatures? Oh, one of the first caricatures were foreign people. And that was, that was circulated and this is what an Italian man looks like. This is what a blah, 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 So they were much more critical and they did comics a lot, or I mean, some parts of comics or caricatures because they were so tied to presentations of immigration and so on. In the two museums, so there was this kind of general overview, and there was like specific exhibits like Claire Bratechel, she was an author and an illustrator who criticized different things about France and bourgeois class and like feminism and so on. But there was not really, I don't remember I saw like any kind of a criticism of comics, which definitely is there. A few years ago, I went to the museum. There was one museum that is specifically dedicated to Hergé, who wrote Tintin, and there they had to address. And it's kind of like it's like a temple to Hergé. Everybody loves Hergé. You live and breathe Hergé, but there was a part where they were to address like some of the racist imagery that appeared in some of the downtown comics, and you know, they kind of addressed it. They said, I should apologize, blah, blah, blah. But here I didn't see anything about any aspects. You know, so there's like in Asterix, there's like problematic representations of Black people, and that wasn't there I mean, not specifically in Asterix, there's in a lot of comics this happens. So I think in these two museums, to me, the more that I got from my research for about nationality was this kind of tie between museums that they host to national identities. And so, for example, little things like the big nose, the Marianne, right? So like they're fine with like exhibiting all these like these serious and really important French national icons in this kind of humorous way because they want to be connected to the comics. But it was definitely very much let's put to the forefront the positives of this art. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah. Yes, hi.
So going back to this idea that museums could be a space where, you know, where we could really lean into all of the great things that comics do and kind of use the genre to inform how they're exhibited. You showed some examples in the beginning of pictures and sculptures and installations where visually the characters were kind of breaking the frame. Do you see museums as a space where characters can break the frame? Where, for example, characters who show up in different comics throughout time who either share similar identities or addressing certain historical events or certain cultural norms, they have a dialogue. Rather than structuring it as this comic, this artistic style, this writer or this creator, get characters in dialogue around two female characters in a dialogue around gender identity, two political characters from different comics in a dialogue around a historical event.
Yeah.
How do you feel about that?
I think I think that's great. I have not seen an example of that. I think that's awesome. And it kind of like it's a different, I'm gonna compare these two things and maybe they're not comparable, but it's kind of like I was saying about board games, these two genres kind of building off of each other. And I think what you're saying is like different, like characters from comics that would be conversing. I think that's a great idea. I think that's kind of, I would plug you in for Madeline's question, how comics should be exhibited. I think that's a really fun way to show different works, introduction to works, but also how they respond to each other about gender norms or, you know, immigration or whatever else and how they developed over time. I think that's great. I think that's an awesome idea that I have not seen implemented as of yet. But I think that's a great point. Yeah, and that would bring something, again, richer to the genre than just like seeing it like this, which is hard because I understand for the introduction, you need to see a little bit of maybe just kind of this is what a comic book is, la la la. But I just feel like it needs to be like kind of short and sweet, and then we get into something that adds to the genre, like you're saying. Yeah. Yes. So I'm pro. Yes. Yeah.
We'll get on that.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Yes. Hi, yes.
Does the university library here acquire the bond this evening? Do they have a collection here?
Yes.
I'm a specialist.
Yes, I'm a librarian for Romance languages, and there is a lot of interest in the department, so we do acquire comic books and graphic novels. There is a whole collection in the art and architecture and engineering library on North Campus. And they are not only to support work in the Romance languages, but it's sort of, we strive to be representative, at least for the American production of comics and graphic novels, and also include international. So there is a great collection in the library.
I hope that also.
It's all in the catalog.
Yes, it is.
I think if you get something out of this presentation is go and read Asterix and Obelix or under a comic book. And I think my job is done. It was interesting. So when I brought this little album to show you, I was just telling Deirdre, I told my parents, I was like, I'm gonna show this one that I have, which is Asterix and Cleopatra. And my dad said, everybody knows about Asterix and Obelix. What are you showing? And I'm like, no. I don't think it really made it, which is kind of interesting that Asterix didn't make it across to the States as much as Tintin did, for example. And like everybody knows about Asterix, I would say. In Europe, I would say, yes, for at least the people that I've encountered with. But anyways, so I really encourage you to check it out. And just, I think that the positive of a lot of comics, kind of to your point about being serious, is that I think everybody can get something out of them, right? So if you read, again, I don't want to just plug Asterix, there's so many other ones. You can really be like, haha, funny, right? And then you can be like, funny, but also things about national identity and like what's the power structure here and what are they saying about other countries and so on and so on. So I think that's kind of the appeal, and also that sense that it can serve kids, teenagers, adults. And I think that's something that I wanted these spaces to serve more, so people could kind of go together through them, not be delineated. This is a children's space for the Wolf and Underpants, and this is everybody else. So yeah, I would say, yeah.
And just quickly in the chat,
Oh, yeah.
David Carter, who is a comics librarian here at the library, is on the Zoom. And he notes we have a pretty good collection of BD in the collection, both in French and translated into English. So for those who haven't explored it yet, I think that's the encouragement maybe you need.
Just the plug, BD is bande dessinée, which is the French francophone term for francophone comics. Yes, that's all.
And I also actually, well, Jeremy, did you have a question? But I also want to thank Jeremy York. He is assisted in facilitating the use of this space from the university library. So thank you on behalf of Museum Studies.
Our pleasure.
Yeah.
Did you have questions?
Oh, yeah, I was just wondering if there was a genre of children's museums in France and how they might represent comics and what that might add to the conversation.
I mean, great question. I have not been to it. You mean like specifically children?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't been to one, I guess. Yeah. But so what was interesting also, so I guess my question is I haven't been to one. Yeah, and my answer is I haven't been to one. But what's specific thing is that like comics museum still holds this childhood appeal because so many kids come to these museums. And then it's kind of heartbreaking to see them kind of disappointed. I'm not saying this should be like a bouncy house, right? But like it's there's something that needs to speak at children also a little more. And it doesn't mean that it's gonna be boring, dumbed down too much for us as adults, I would say. But yeah, that's a great point. I'm sure they must be a huge part of children's museums. Yes, but I'll need to check that out then. Yeah, thank you.
That's your next trip.
Yeah, it's my next trip. FDRM too. You just like calm down. Yeah.
Do you have any final questions?
Yes.
What got you to get involved to the point where you are going to do your research, PhD research on comics? What is initially started this?
Yeah. So apart from this like hospital story, I went to, when I was a kid, I couldn't really study French for different reasons. I'm from Serbia, and then whatever you get dealt in school, that's what you get dealt with. And when I came to undergrad here, I went to Kenyon College in Ohio, which is a small art school, and I had just a really good French professor. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna keep with French. And then when it was my senior year, we were like, okay, what's your topic? A little thesis. And I just read Persepolis, which I really liked and probably spoke to me a little bit. Obviously very different experiences, but spoke to me a little bit as an immigrant, I think. And I was like, oh, this is a fun book. And I think I also liked art history, but I was never brave enough to like take art history. So this kind of seemed like a middle ground. And also something that's important to me now is that I can read from my research and do something that I can read over and over and over again without getting bored of it, without getting, I don't know, oversaturated by, I guess. But honestly, I came to dissertation to research. Well, let's back up. I came to the PhD program open-minded, kind of like I'll try all these different things, and I was not thinking I'm gonna do comic books. But honestly, from the sample platter I was given, I was like, comic books are the most interesting ones for me, I guess. Yeah, and I think every time, I mean, this is true for so many things, but I think every time I read them, I can get some new out of it, visually or textually or whatever it is. But I think for me, it's just because it's so fun, and there are a lot of times the text I'm looking at are a little bit humorous too. I think that's incredible. Obviously, people can be humorous in other forms. I guess that was a long answer to just say I really enjoy them, and I've enjoyed them since I was a kid, and I still enjoy them, and I haven't encountered anything else that's as enjoyable to me. So it was kind of a luck of the draw because I just really started doing French, and then I realized, oh, this is a huge deal. So and that worked out well for me. Yes, thank you. That's a cute question to get. Yeah.
And thank you to Gala. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you all have a good Thanksgiving holiday in whatever way you celebrate. So thank you.
Yes.
Last year. And the other question is, yes, in Angoulême, they would still have more museum